Free for her, she will share, and then you have the freedom to ask some of the questions, everything. I'll place a mic after that there so you can ask from there. So people who are hearing, joining through YouTube or Zoom, they can also hear. Please give her a big hand. Thank you. Thank you. And I always say, in my life I have been privileged to meet Mother Teresa 3 times. But when I was looking at her, the way she did and listened to her stories, I could realize, oh my God, there is another wonderful, saintly person among us. We are blessed to have you, and I welcome you. Thank you. Thank you. It's all is yours.
Well, hello everybody. I'm so delighted you're so interested in farm workers. It's a real trip. You know what? I would pull my mask down, but I can't because I have an injury on this cheek. So I don't want the discussion to be about the injury. So I'll just leave it up. I hope you can hear me. So for those of you who don't know my story, I studied the impact of the North American Free Trade Agreement on the farms in Mexico, and at the time, the farms in Mexico were sustainable. They were based on the corn, bean, and squash intercrop, and all the farmers told me that as long as they grew those crops together, they helped each other, and they never had a problem with pests, and they were poor, but they always had enough to eat. And that particular type of farming has been in effect for, we think, 7,000 to 9,000 years. And so when NAFTA came in, and I'll be very brief, the tariffs that protected these small producer farmers at the border were eliminated, and the GMO corn from this country, along with all the pesticides and fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, were rapidly dumped into Mexico, and we're losing all of the genetics of all those many, many corn strains. Mexico used to be the repository for corn genetics for the world. So corn is one of 3 crops that supports all of humanity, and whenever a country had a problem with their corn, they just went to Mexico, located a similar type of environment, and oftentimes crossed their sick corn with Mexican corn, and that resolved the problem. Well, we're losing all those strains of corn in Mexico. And finally, in 2013, a federal judge in Mexico said that he was not going to permit any more sales of genetically modified corn in Mexico because it was an imminent threat to an imminent environmental threat in the country. But when I've gone to Mexico recently, within the last 2 years before COVID, all of those strains are being replaced by genetically modified corn. Unfortunately, in some of the villages that were so pristine, the children now who have been exposed to pesticides are getting cancer, and the whole farming system is unraveling after all of these thousands of years. So I studied this for a PhD program. I interviewed 22 families on farms in west central Mexico, and another, I think, 30 or 40 farm worker families here in the United States. And I was really appalled by the suffering, the inordinate suffering, because once the corn from this country went into Mexico, it undercut the price of corn these farmers in the countryside had long been able to earn. And so now they're pretty much without an occupation. And they had 3 choices. They could stay on their farm in Mexico and starve with their family. And I met 2 farmer families in Mexico who made that choice. They would rather die than leave their farms. Another choice was to go to a big city and work and send money home to the farm. And then the third choice, which we always hear about here, is an undocumented border crossing to this country to become a farm worker. And in our state, we have approximately 60% of farm workers are undocumented. And in Santa Cruz County, the estimate is as high as 83%. And these people live in constant fear of deportation and having their families torn apart. They've already had their families torn apart once when they had to leave their farm to come here to earn money to send back to the farm. And now if they've established new families and get deported, they're also afraid of having that family torn apart. So there's inordinate pain and suffering in the farm worker community today. And most of them, especially the ones from Oaxaca, they're the newest arrivals, they are either in the field working or hiding in whatever dwelling that they happen to be living in. You won't see them walking around on the street much because, again, they're afraid of being exposed and deported. So what happened, I guess one of the questions was, how did you get into this work? Well, after studying this scenario and writing my 835-page dissertation, on the last page of my dissertation, I sat in front of my computer and looked at the last page, and I realized up to that point I had planned to go into a university, continue the research, and also continue teaching because I've been teaching. I taught at San Jose City College for many, many years. But what happened in front of on the last page of my computer, of my dissertation in front of my computer, is I just had an epiphany. I just started yelling. It's kind of embarrassing to admit now, but I just started yelling. These are real live human beings. These are people with hopes, with dreams, with cares, concerns, family members, just like anybody else. And they're suffering. Why is this? And I thought about it. I must have sat there for at least 5 hours thinking about everything I learned and what I was experiencing at that moment. And I thought to myself, the public deserves to know about this. They need to know what's going on because there was virtually nothing in the news about it. I mean, you might have found a little paragraph here and there, but nothing about this huge influx of human beings from Mexico and why they were coming. So I call them economic refugees of our trade policies. And so I realized that with my background teaching and the work I'd done on this doctorate, I was in a good position to educate the public, and that's what I started doing. And I had a policy, I will speak to whoever will listen. This information, the public deserves to know what's going on with farm workers. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And as more and more people got concerned and joined me in the concern, our organization started to grow, and eventually we were able to get 501c3 status, become an official nonprofit, and now we have many different projects that benefit farm workers. And rather than farm workers being an invisible community that no one ever knows about, they're actually in the news quite frequently these days. So I think that our goal is becoming realized in that farm workers now are sometimes even on the front page of local newspapers. And people are getting concerned, and speaking to your group on the Farm Worker Reality Tour last Sunday, was a real delight because, as some people said, a lot of this is immoral. And it is. It absolutely is. We need change. So that's kind of the history of how I got involved in work with farm workers. I don't know quite where to go from here. If you have questions, should we go, or should I describe some of the programs we have, maybe? The Farm Worker Reality Tour, we bring, I want people to hear the stories I've been hearing for almost 25 years. So I bring groups to the farm workers, and they tell their stories. We have an undocumented family, and they talk about walking across the desert and getting spines in their feet, and how hard it is with kids and not having enough food and water, etc. We also go to the migrant camp, and we have the Buena Vista Migrant Camp in Watsonville, and 3 women describe what their experience is there. And then, we end up in the home of a farm worker that lives permanently year-round in a residential home, and she fixes us dinner, and she's a tremendous cook. So she fixes us dinner, and then we discuss. If we have time, we talk about immigration. We didn't the last time, but we have these farm worker reality tours. And then yesterday we had one of our monthly distributions. So what I found in February 3 years ago, when I visited a Oaxacan family, they had 2 children that were crying for food. And the kids kept crying and the parents ignored them. And I finally stopped the conversation and said, give the kids some food. And they looked really ashamed and looked down at the ground. And then they said, we don't have money for food, we're not working. And so I went over to their refrigerator just on instinct and opened it. And they had 1 head of lettuce, 1/3 gallon of milk, and 2 Jell-O cups. And that was all the food in the house. So I asked them, I said, is this true of just your family, or is this the whole community? They said, no, the whole community is starving. And so we called the food bank, the Second Harvest Food Bank, and that afternoon they brought out food for 144 families. So it just shows how important it is that we stay in touch with this population to find out what's really going on with them. And since then, every month, the second Friday of the month, we have what we call a distribution, and we partner with Second Harvest Food Bank. They bring out food for anywhere from 150 to 350 farm worker families. And then we provide household goods, diapers, paper towels, toilet paper, shampoo, bath soap, dish soap, laundry detergent, all these things that they can't afford, really. And then since then, it's grown to where now we have people donating clothes. Yesterday, Acupuncturists Without Borders came and gave massages and acupuncture treatments for back ailments. We've had 3 COVID clinics under a carport in the backyard. The doctors were very kind to create a clinic in that environment. We had a flu clinic the distribution before last. So and then a lot of people now are providing us with coats, and a family just today took, I think, 10 sleeping bags to the same house to store in case somebody doesn't have a bed or blankets. So the things that we take for granted that are easy for us to access, for farm workers, it's almost sometimes difficult or even impossible. And so we try to meet those needs as best we can. So that's another activity that we do. We are bridging the digital divide. We provide computers for 5 families at a time, and they can come to our office and learn how to use a computer. And if they stay for a Zoom presentation about a subject that's relevant to them, like rent control or eviction or COVID, then we give them the computer, and then their children can access the internet and do schoolwork, etc. So that's our Bridging the Digital Divide project. And then anything that comes up that farm workers need, like we've had farm workers that are very ill. So we find a physician that's willing to treat them and treat them with respect. And we found a hospital, Dominican hospital, that will treat them if they need to be hospitalized for no charge as farm workers. So we're doing everything we can to make life, but ultimately I think we need a new system. We are finding too many cancers, ADHD, autism spectrum syndrome, and learning disabilities among the children of farm workers. And a new study came out just recently from UCLA that shows that if fumigation occurs, children within a 2.5-mile radius of the fumigation can be impacted by those pesticides. And if there's more than one pesticide sprayed simultaneously, the impact is doubled or tripled even. So these kids, quite frankly, I am sick and tired of meeting these children with these conditions. And I was on a call to the governor's office recently, and it's very hard for me to stay rational talking about this. I told his representative, I said, you tell the governor if he wants me to bring some of these children up there to his office so he can meet them personally, I'm happy to do that. So I'm waiting to hear back about that. But there's a side group now forming called CORA in Santa Cruz, which stands for Campaign for Organic Regenerative Agriculture. And our goal is to get rid of all pesticides, synthetic pesticides, in Santa Cruz County. That's the goal. And so we've started that process. We're going to have a forum on November 13th, to which you all are invited, in the Watsonville Civic Center. And we're moving to eliminate pesticides, which are one of the key reasons that farm workers have a life expectancy of only 49 years. So there's a lot of work to be done, to put it mildly. And then if somebody goes off to college and needs a computer, we supply them with that. We provide tutoring if they need it. We support education, but unfortunately when children are born with learning disabilities, they don't have much of a choice because it probably will be a lifelong condition for them, unfortunately. And farm workers are the least able to provide the necessary and needed treatments for children in those special needs categories. So that's kind of a summary. I hope I haven't forgotten too much, or there's so much going on, it's hard to sometimes keep track of it, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
First, thank you for your presentation. I'd like to get a better idea about the migrant character of the population we're talking about. Do these people live here for a period of time, They work in the fields perhaps in the off-season, they're not working but stay there, or do they move to another location? Do they come back around and live here again next year? I'm not quite sure how that works. Could you fill us in on that?
Good question. Well, I'll start with the Buena Vista Migrant Camp. There used to be a regulation called the 50-mile regulation. And by the way, just so you know my stance on this, I see farm workers and the rules and laws and regulations, et cetera, that govern their lives as rework slavery from the South. I don't see that slavery ever ended. It's just that people don't own other bodies, but the impact on the farm workers is basically the same. Is basically the same with the kinds of regulations, laws, rules, et cetera, that are imposed on them. And the 50-mile regulation is a perfect example. The goal is to keep farm workers from becoming educated. So what was required in the 34 migrant camps in this state is that as soon as the season is over, and the season goes from about April to November, then farm workers would have to move at least 50 miles away if they wanted to come back to that same camp and enjoy the affordable, decent housing. It's one of the only places they'll find affordable, decent housing. Now, when they pick up their families and move, number one, they have to get rid of all their belongings that they can't put in the car. So every year that they come back, they have to buy new things. New dishes, new sheets, new whatever. That's one. And then their children who are moved 50 miles away have to go to a different school. And so whatever school they go to usually has a different curriculum. So they fall further and further behind with time, eventually drop out, and either become farm workers like their parents or join gangs. So I and several other people and 3 attorneys fought that for 9 years. I personally made 7 trips up to Sacramento to Housing and Community Development. We did an ethnographic study of the 4 largest migrant camps. We made PowerPoint presentations, and no one would do a thing. So, sort of by chance, I went to a presentation by our current Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis. And we got in a conversation. She asked what I do. I told her. And she said, gee, I'd like to visit the migrant camp. So I thought, aha. So I took her to the migrant camp, to the most vocal family about this issue of having to move 50 miles away. And she was so disturbed that she, right in that, quote, living room of that person, called the Attorney General, at the time Javier Becerra, to report what she'd learned. And then within 2 months, she sent me an email and said Governor Brown has now put this issue on some bill and the 50-mile regulation will be eliminated. Now, this whole time, I asked the question, what is the purpose of the 50-mile regulation? No one has ever given me an answer. So that's one example of many of the kind of oppression that farm workers and their families face. And the thing that gets parents in the field in the morning is the fact that they look forward to a time when their children can study and get a career and get out of farm work. That's what motivates them. And with the 50-mile regulation and all the barriers, like there was no internet all last year in the migrant camp, so nobody could study. And we raised hell about that, and finally got internet in the migrant camp. But everything is done to keep people from becoming educated. It's very frustrating, to say the least. So back to immigration, We have that group that leaves every year, and some of them stay now because they want their kids in the same school year-round. And now they can do that because we got rid of the 50-mile regulation. They can stay with relatives in Watsonville or find a place to rent in the meantime, whatever. Then there were, a solid group of farm workers who rent dilapidated houses and other structures within the city of Watsonville, overcrowded always, and they stay there year-round. So one household I visited had 16 people living in less than 1,000 square feet. I think there were 3 or 4 families and one bathroom. And they told me they have to line up in the morning to use the bathroom. So that's the kind of living conditions they exist in. And then the owners of the houses don't maintain them. And so they start falling apart, and luckily we have some people on our team now that know how to do home repairs. We put in new floors, we stop leaks in the roof. Again, they just don't take care of their property, and then the farm workers who are renting are suffering. And people say, well, why don't they just move out of that house? Well, if they do, there's no place to go, and the renters know that because there's such a demand for housing. So there's the group then that lives full-time, and then in the city, there's a few people in the past that would, once the season was over, which is starting to happen now, they would go to Oxnard or Santa Maria and start harvesting there. What we're seeing in the last 2 years is the worst situation I've seen in all the time I've worked with farm workers. Because of the drought and COVID, the drought, a lot of growers are putting whole acreages of their properties out of production. So farm workers aren't getting nearly enough work to pay their bills because they're paid, it's wage labor, they're paid a wage hourly, and they can't afford to pay rent or buy food. And so many of them are starting to leave the area. And the concern I have is that we're losing our farm labor force in the Watsonville and Pajaro Valley area simply because there's not enough work and it's too expensive. So only about 50% of farm workers this past season had full-time work. The rest of the farm workers had maybe 2 to 5 hours a day. And no one can live on they were already impoverished, and then this just made it worse. So that's what we're faced with now. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation and discussion on this. I have like 2 kind of related questions. One is, forgive my ignorance in this area. When these farm workers are working, I'm assuming they're working for, pretty large farm businesses, right?
Mostly.
Do they do those businesses even pay minimum wage, or are they kind of paying yeah, that's what I figured, yeah. Because they're I'm assuming they can kind of take advantage of them because
Totally.
because they have like
Totally.
they have no resources, money, and also B, if they go and report it,
Yep.
they get in trouble because
They get
you're
blacklisted
illegal.
or deported. So,
Okay.
And there's no unionizing.
Right, because there's no legal protections because you're breaking the
Undocumented.
law, right?
Yeah, you're
Okay,
undocumented.
yeah, I've seen, it's funny because it's not only low income that have this problem because of our broken immigration system, although it's considerably better. Is there any path at all, like any outlook at all for these people to get legal status? Or is it basically like, I'm gonna die this way, but at least my kids might be legal status?
Well, there used to be, if the kids are born here, they
Right.
have it automatically. But there used to be, what was it, H.R. 141, a bill for the blue card. So if you worked 100 hours in the field, you got a blue card and couldn't be deported. And I thought that was terrific. Then they replaced that with H.R. 5038, the Farm Labor Modernization Act, and that is terrible. Oh my God.
Yeah, so in other words, there's no path right now.
No,
to even be I'm not even talking like citizenship or anything, just being legally here so that way
Yes.
you're not in fear. There's no path
Right.
now.
I have not heard of one thing. And I mean, people always say, well, they always want to become citizens. No, they just want to be out in the world and not worry about being deported and split up from their families. And there's nothing worse than being in the car with a woman who's talking to her husband on the phone from Mexico, and he's sobbing because he got deported and can't be with his family here. I mean, this is stuff that people don't see, and I personally think it's criminal, especially in a culture that talks about family values. Who are the values for? It's certainly not farm workers. And these are the people that feed us. It's remarkable to me that it's tolerated. Again, I think it's a form of slavery. Yes. Yeah, so we have NAFTA to thank for that because Salinas de Gortari, the president of Mexico under NAFTA, estimated that 1 million farmers would leave their land for the first, every year for the first 15 years of NAFTA. That's 15 million farmers leaving the land because they can no longer support themselves. Where did he expect them to go? You know, prior to NAFTA, we had 4.5 million undocumented people. Today, we have about 11.4 million undocumented people living in fear constantly, and most of them doing very productive work.
Sorry, I got another question.
No, that's okay. Go for it.
Actually, on that topic, are there any efforts that you're aware of right now to try to correct that? Because I mean, it strikes me these people. I mean, I'm not trying to get rid of people, but I'm just saying like they didn't come here because they wanted to come here.
Right.
They came here because they needed to, right?
Right.
And is there any effort to repair this problem where they basically had unsustainable farms in their homeland?
Well, you know, I mean, I watch all of the money. Just imagine how much money is spent guarding the border, deporting people, flying people out, sending them back to Mexico, never mind the deaths and carnage. And if we took that money and recreated the economic reality of the countryside in Mexico, people would go home. Most of them don't want to be here. That's the thing people don't understand. They're breaking our immigration laws. No, we set up a system that forced them off their land, and the only way they could survive was to come here undocumented. That's the reality, and it's a real boon for the agro industry, right? Because now the growers don't have to worry about any unionization, any people confronting them and the way they're being treated. The Southern Poverty Law Center came out with a study that was just amazing, where 60 to 80% of farm worker women are either sexually harassed, groped, or outright raped in the field, and some of them have to engage in sexual behavior with the supervisor to become employed. This is it's the most sordid system. Why do we tolerate this? That's the question. Really.
I was wondering, you know, Cesar Chavez did a lot for the farm workers. Whatever happened to the farm workers union?
The UFW supports HR 5038. Go figure. And that law, if it's passed, I think it's in the Senate now, if it gets passed, it will reinforce the H-2A visa program. And what that is a grower can go to Mexico, load up his truck with workers, all male workers generally, bring them up to a house, and they can live in the house and be there or in the field and nowhere else. So they have no rights whatsoever. Yeah, no, it's terrible.
And now you're saying they have, after the harvest is done, they have to leave. They cannot stay in the. Why? Why can't they stay?
Again, good question. It's like the 50-mile regulation. There's a housing shortage. Hello, we've got 144 empty units here.
Yeah.
Why don't we use them?
Who stays in them when they're gone?
Nobody. It's disgraceful,
And
I
do
tell
they
you.
take, when they say they have to get rid of all their belongings, are we talking about they have to bring in? What do these poor people?
Well, they do, I mean, the migrant camp provides, bed frame and a mattress, a stove, a refrigerator, basic stuff. But anything extra, like if they want a comfortable sofa and go out and buy it, it has to go.
That's terrible.
I agree, that's
really,
why.
Really upsetting.
Well, it is.
Now, have any of these farm workers been able citizenship? None of whatsoever.
Well, the ones that are born here are citizens by definition. And in fact, we have one from the migrant camp, a woman, Jasmine Fernandez is her name. And not only is she a citizen, but she has moved through the academic ranks and is now doing a doctorate degree at Cal State. Cal State, Sacramento. She's up there. And when she went to Sac State, poor woman, she didn't have a bed or a computer. I said, no problem, you can have my bed, and I'll buy you a computer. So we did that, and she's doing great. And she wants to open a clinic once she gets her doctorate degree, because 1 in 6 young Latinas in this culture attempt suicide. And that's another statistic no one talks about, but she wants to do something about that. She's in psychology.
And why don't they?
Because they want a docile agricultural workforce that won't rebel, that won't,
This is government slavery.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Yeah, and well, I wish I could say more positive things, and not only that, I have never met a farm worker who knows what they're being exposed to in the field. And I tell them, I say, look, ask your supervisor what they're using. What is that chemical you're smelling? Give me a brand, give me the name of the substance, whatever it is. I'll look it up, find out about it, and find out how you can protect yourself. He said, they won't tell us. They won't tell us, so they just tell us to go back to work and it's safe. Right. And so that's another battle. I'll just go ahead. That's another battle we have going on now, is publication of the NOIs. Have you heard anything about that over on this side? Okay, notices of intent, they're called. And so if a grower wants to use a restricted use pesticide, which is the worst, they have to inform the agricultural commissioner of that county, and the agricultural commissioner has to approve it. And they always do. So we want the notices of intent published on the internet so everybody knows what, where, and when it's going to be sprayed. People can protect themselves. The agricultural commissioner statewide refused to do that. So we're in a big battle now about that, and then eliminating pesticides completely in Santa Cruz County.
This problem is just so over.
Yes, it is.
What can an ordinary, what would be the writing to legislators?
Well, I think that a lot of it has to do with
But how do we make realize that for our migrants, try to, that where we start by writing?
I
by
would, or
petition?
calling, or getting a petition, or organizing as a group and making an appointment with Governor Newsom and meeting as a group and saying it's intolerable, I don't want it in the state.
Organization, guide, establish to us, I'm sorry,
Well, we can help. I mean, I'm used to writing, so that's not a problem. As one person once told me, you're in the trenches. So I'm so immersed in the community, a lot of times it's hard for me to get out and take care of those kind of things. But certainly as a parish here, you could work on it. I mean, all the legislators need to know is that there are a group of people that are really angry about this and want it changed. And using relentless pressure. I mean, I found that persistence is definitely the key. You never give up. Did you guys see the film Dark Waters? Or order the Netflix Dark Waters. It's about a group of attorneys that brought down DuPont for poisoning people. And again, it was relentless pressure, but it's very inspiring.
thank you. Get in touch with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do anything I can because I feel so strongly about all this. And as a former student of mine,
Evening, everyone. Dr. Lopez, first of all, it's a pleasure. I think I see you every 20 years, but you still speak the same, you know? You know, one thing that comes to mind, and usually I attend church here on Sunday mornings. When Father stated you were going to be here, it's really important that, you know, I always know that you were a strong believer in helping the farm workers and what they have and what they don't have. So I guess the question I have is, like the woman commented, what can we do for your organization that would encompass and help currently the people that you are working for and trying to help out?
well, there's several things come to mind. I mean, I gave out, didn't I give out the Oaxacan Shed pamphlets at the, yeah, and there's a list of items that are always in demand. Diapers, size 5 and 6, baby wipes, paper towels, toilet paper, soap, it's all listed there. So those things would be very helpful. Another is as it's getting colder, we need coats for women. And the reason I don't say coats for men and children is because the women take care of the men and the children, but oftentimes show up freezing to death with a thin sweater. So it's good if we had some jackets for them. That's another. And then beyond that, I do this already, I would make appointments with the assemblymen, with the board of supervisors in the area, make appointments and go talk to them and say, no, this is not going to continue. Yeah. Absolutely. You have a right to speak to these people. So use your voice and speak to them. They represent us and we pay their salary. So they need to do what we say. This is supposed to be government of, by, and for the people, not for the legislators and the rich people and all the rest.
Thank you
And-
so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just having slavery in my backyard, I live about 20 miles from Watsonville, that's, to me, is intolerable. Anybody else?
Thank you, Doctor. I've been thinking, and there's just too little time right now, so I'm hoping that we'll have a way to be able to contact you with our reflections and our assistance.
Sure, yeah, I actually have some cards in my car I could bring out. And I also have 3 books that I wrote. I wrote The Farm Worker's Journey. If you want to know more detail, it won a national award. And these are used copies, but they're in great shape. And so I want to leave them with you all, and you can share them or whatever. And then, let's see. So I've got those. And then I have some stickers that say support farm workers on your card. So I've got those, and then I can get some cards if you'd like to call or organize or whatever. I'm all for it because we need change. And then I brought these, I just got these photos from the UFW. And they show the farm worker and tell a story. In fact, one of my favorite legislators, Robert Rivas, which includes Santa Cruz and Monterey County. He grew up with a grandfather who was a farm worker and died of cancer. And he is greatest advocates. I really support. In fact, I've been to Sacramento twice to support. Anybody else? Lies when you're having fun, right?
I went on the farm workers tour last week, and a company specifically by name came up that sells berries that I'm sure we've all bought at Safeway. Yes. And I thought about this all week, and I was wondering if we needed to maybe, as consumers, reach out to that company directly, or when we shop at the store, if we need to be more aware of what these companies do when we buy our food, or if that would help put a dent in this problem at all, or is it too big of a problem where something like that isn't really going to make a difference?
No, I think it does make a big difference. I'll tell you my experience with Driscoll, and you can make your own decisions. But I read a lot of David Bacon's work. In fact, if you want to read more about H.R. 5038, he has an excellent article on the Oakland Institute website, and you can download his article free. And it talks all about the drawbacks of H.R. 5038. It's great. But he wrote a report where Driscoll has subsidiaries in Mexico and other locations where the company sends the army out to beat the farm workers. So that was the last Driscoll berry I will ever eat. And I took the information to my local Wild Roots alternative market that's all organic, and I left it with the person that stocks the produce, and he hasn't had Driscoll berries there since. So that's my experience with Driscolls. I know they're very famous and they're huge and all that, but they've got issues. And it's interesting how they try to sneak in because when we first became established as a 501c3, they wanted to give us money. And I wouldn't take money because then they could use our logo on their website and pretend like they're doing wonderful things for farm workers. So I wouldn't take their money. So then a while later, somebody from Driscoll called and said, we'd like to tutor a family. And I said, great. So I assigned them a family, and they went for 3 sessions with the family, teaching the kids math and how to read and such. And then after the 3rd session, they called me, and I asked how it was going. They said, oh, it's going great, and by the way, we'd like to put your name on the list for charity. And I said, no, 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 we don't take any money from growers, sorry. We just don't do it. So that was the end of that.
I seem to recall there was one other company that the workers had worked all the season without pay and were told they were going to get paid at the end of the year instead and never got paid at all. Would you tell them about that?
Yeah, well, I always say farm workers need 3 things that would transform their lives. 1, comprehensive immigration reform. That's key. 2, a living wage. We are subsidizing growers by providing all this extra stuff at our distributions. If they made a decent wage, they could buy their own food and supplies, the kinds they want. And then the last is a contract with the grower so the grower cannot steal their wages, which goes on all the time. And on the Farm Worker Reality Tour, we all met a woman who, she and her family worked for a grower for, I think, the entire season, who promised to pay them at the end of the season for all their work and didn't do it, and took their money and bought a huge house in Watsonville and a brand new car, and they attempted to go to an attorney and get some redress for this awful situation, and the attorney asked to see the contract. And when they said they didn't have one, then he said there was nothing they could do. And then after that, the grower declared bankruptcy so that no one could ever sue him after that. So that kind of thing goes on all the time because these people are powerless, they're voiceless. They're actually considered less than human beings and just swept under the rug. It's like these children that are getting sick. This would never happen in Saratoga or Los Gatos. If there was some kind of epidemic of all these kids getting cancer and ADHD, et cetera, you can bet there would be whole squads of doctors, attorneys, and everything else to find the cause and to stop it immediately. But farm worker children don't count, and neither do farm workers. They're just disposable human beings. And I think that needs to change. God would be angry.
I think. I'd like to thank you, not just for being here, for being there for the farm workers, and for your great ministry and all you do, and also taking the time to be here with us to enlighten us, and not enlightening, I would say transforming our hearts is the word, you know. Hearts needs to be transformed so things can change. Thank you. Please give her a big hand. And to many of you who have asked, where do we go from here? There are 2 things, 2 areas. Specifically, one is the area of justice, social justice. We will try to see what area we can support and work from there. The another area is the area of charity. It has 2 areas, right? Sometimes what they need, we could try to give the supplies, material, things what we can collect. That's only one part of it. If there is no justice connection, it's just like a throwaway charity and we feel nice. But that is not the goal. So we will have both dimensions, justice and we will be trying to help in the area of justice and also in areas where we can support with material and resources. And we will have that conversation as we go on. And just as you know, I know, not taking too long, the major problem is also there was a time, sometimes we don't realize. Many of us may have this whole area as a farm, but then you talk about my grandparents worked in farm, that's different. There were farmers and farm workers. Now that is not how it works. There are farm workers and there are growers. They are not farmers. Farmers have a relationship to the farm workers. I come from a farm and we took care of our farm workers because it's a relationship. Growers, no, they are corporations, they don't care. Only goal is profit. And that is where the farmers are gone. And that is also one of the major problems. So that is where we don't realize, because when we don't realize that equation, we may just miss the point telling, oh, we had farm, we were nice. No more farmers. It's only growers, corporations, and farm workers. And that's where it is. Anyway, thank you. Thank you also those who joined through the Zoom. It's not just for some information. That's not the goal. It is for beginning a new way of relationship, walking with the farm workers. That's what we look forward to. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. And before we go, I like, if you don't mind, I know I like a photo with everybody. I'm sorry, I like photos. So if you could join with Dr.